So, the German Navy, the Kaiserlich Marine at this point, had this really interesting habit going in their battlecruisers. They produced one, of course, which was the Von der Tann. Then they produced two for the Malta class. Then they produced the Seydlitz, which is today's topic. And then they produced the three the Flingers. So they go 1, 2, 1, 3. Which already sets up a bit of an interesting precedent, because you start to look at it going, well, is the Seydlitz, which is the fourth one, is it a halfway point between the Malta class and the Flingers? Is it a testing point? Is it something else entirely? What is it exactly in the development of their battlecruisers? Now, before we get into this, I will admit, I posted a little bit of an update to say this was going to be late, and this was delayed till Monday, because of things that happened on Friday. And I just quickly copied across to make sure I didn't spell Seydlitz wrong. I just copied and pasted from my notes. Now, we usually use SMS for ships which are in the German Navy in this period. But in my notes, I don't. In my notes, because I have them divided up by Kaiserlich Marine, Reichsmarine, and Kriegsmarine, I have KMS, RMS, and K, little r, MS. And I have that because I track some vessels' careers throughout their service, and they serve in all three. And it's a way of me keeping track of what events happen when. So, I posted her as KMS. I apologise for that. She's SMS. But I thought I'd explain that because, again, it's one of those things. Historians, all of us, we all have our own notes. We all have our own official, our own version of shorthand, and it's not today's main question. But I would love to hear what anyone else's who watches the channel, what your personal shorthand is. It's always fun to hear about other people's. You never use it yourself. You never nick or borrow anyone else's shorthand, because everyone's shorthand fits with their own thinking and their own thought process. Now, the thing about Seydlitz is sometimes she's considered the last of the first generation of battlecruisers, or sometimes the first of the next generation of battlecruisers, which truly shows to me that she's a transition between the two classes. She participates in Dogger Bank, in Jutland, in pretty much every major action in World War One for battlecruisers of the Kaiserlich Marine. And during Dogger Bank, for example, she's actually hit by a 13.5-inch shell from Lion, which causes a magazine, well, nearly causes a magazine explosion, and it's actually the surviving of that which leads to the Germans adopting far better practices in terms of magazine security and fire prevention than existed previously. The other example of her to give is to always think about is that after the Battle of Jutland, she pretty much has to be floated home. She has at points negative freeboard with the North Sea around her, and very nearly sinks. Very nearly sinks. There's a debate over that, because some people go, well, she touched the bottom. Yeah, it was in shallow water and they got her off on their own seams, so no. We wouldn't say she sank. We might say she went aground. But the thing is, she survives. She survives because she's very well built. She survives because she is fundamentally built to what I would call the Battlecruiser rather than the Battlecruiser standard. And let's explain that again before, because I have to explain this in quite a few videos, because not everyone watches all my videos, and some people what are brand new when they're watching a video. It's sometimes the first time viewer, so I'm going to explain it. There's a capital ship spectrum. And this causes a lot of fun with people, especially when they're looking at ships, because the spectrum moves within generations. And it often depends on things like the level of subdivision, the level of speed, the level of coverage of armor, not necessarily the thickness of the armor. So you could have very thick armor, but it doesn't cover that much, and that can make you a battlecruiser. But also it's what you're designed for. So Battlecruiser, or what started off as the Dreadnought Armoured Cruisers, are really the economic warfare, fleet reconnaissance assets. They are the direct Dreadnought versions of Armoured Cruisers. They are taking over those roles. They are still very much in the cruiser mentality. Then you have, slightly further along, Battlecruisers. Now, Battlecruiser, one word, they are designed to engage battlecruisers. They're designed to engage each other. So they have more armor, they have more firepower, and some of them, the German ones especially, are designed with the idea that their battle fleet doesn't have enough battleships. Japanese are also examples of this, the Congos. And therefore, in order to try and make it less likely they're outnumbered in a fight, or to make it harder for someone to outnumber them, they're designed to take a place in the battle line. Now, they're not designed to be a primary in the battle line. They're designed to be a secondary. Their purpose is to put up a long enough fight, but they will probably die gloriously, but to put up a long enough fight in the battle line that their battleships can hopefully win the battle with their opposing numbers and then come back and beat up the remaining battleships. But it is very well understood and very clear in that doctrine and that idea that they will lose those battlecruisers, that they will be sunk. And please note, the Germans and the Japanese start this idea off with their armoured cruisers. They start this off in their ideas of development of them in the 1890s. Their battlecruiser, their formations, are a continuation of that. And the reason is because both of them are designing themselves to fight larger powers. Japan, well, fighting Russia first in the Russo-Japanese War, but then as time went on, they were honestly considering the options of possibly fighting Germany or fighting America. That's one of the reasons why they like the alliance with Britain. It means they only have to deal with one power at a time. And Britain likes that alliance for similar reasons. For Germany, when you're building yourself to fight Britain, you are going to be outnumbered. The good example is Jutland, where even if you include all their battlecruisers, all their sovereign-style battleships, aka pre-dreadnoughts, and dreadnoughts, that is a smaller number than the Royal Navy is fielding dreadnought battleships at Jutland, let alone once you add in battlecruisers. So the Royal Navy has more battleships alone than the Germans are putting out entirely their combined capital ships. It's not a lack of effort, it's their limitations of their own infrastructure and their own government spending. So it's perfectly sensible for them to push that. But if you consider the British, especially with the Invincibles and the other earlier classes of battle cruisers, they're very much battle cruiser, two words. They're very much about economic warfare. They're very much about going around the world and dealing with surface raiders. That's their mission. That's their profile. That's what they're there for. And they're built around that. It's only once you get to some of the later constructions that you start to get battle cruisers. And of course, once you sort of go on between sort of from battle cruisers over here, two words, to battle cruiser, one word, to fast battleships and pure battleships. And the difference between them is the level of subdivision. So this will be closer to cruiser level subdivision. This will be battleship level subdivision. This will look like a honeycomb structure. This will look like, how do I put this? More like a chest of drawers. That's sort of the idea you're looking for in terms of its subdivision. and in terms of the level of armor coverage. So they can have the same thickness or thicker armor. A battle cruiser built in a later generation might have thicker armor than previous generation battleships, but it will cover less space, a smaller percentage of the hull than the battleship's armor will. So the battleship will have a larger protected space, a larger sort of citadel area that they can withdraw within to, and more protection covering that, and greater subdivision within it. What are the reasons for this? Well, to an extent, a battle cruiser is designed very much about having the space and the accommodation and hotel space for its crew, as we tend to term it, hotel space, to sustain them for a longer term deployment. Now, as you go down that, you have less and less conditions for a longer term deployment, which is another reason why you become less and less likely to have a long term foreign station deployment. Now, usually the example given here by people is they go, well, hang on, the Royal Navy deployed their ships regularly to the Mediterranean fleet, and surely that's a foreign deployment. No, that's not really considered a foreign station deployment in the British terminology, because just look at how much of support facilities, how much basing, how much accoutrements they have to sustain the fleet in the Mediterranean. You very quickly get the idea that basically the Mediterranean is a home away from home. You know, it's their second home. And that affects the things that are in them. Now with the German vessels, well, again, when you start to look at their battle cruisers, you very quickly realize they are battle cruisers, single words, and they are sort of heading towards fast battleships. They really are heading towards it. But the joy about it being a spectrum is things can be moving along. It's like when we're looking at post-World War I, the G3s. They're often a product of debate, and so and HMS Hood is also a product of debate. Whether she's a whether she's a battle cruiser or a fast battleship. Well, actually, Hood and the Admirals start off as battle cruisers. That's what they're being designed around, economic warfare. Then post-Jutland, they're moved to being closer to battle cruiser. Okay? The G3s, they are very much battle cruiser their period, but I would say they are probably slightly beyond, because they have been reinforced and armoured in the experience of Jutland, etc. So they are slightly towards the fast battleship spectrum, in that they're over the designator on that spectrum line, but they are far closer to battle cruiser than they are to fast battleship, because again, have a look at the subdivision, have a look at the coverage of the armour compared to the N3, which is a contemporary battleship, have a look at their orientation of their spacing and their design for deployments, and you very much get the idea this is something which is being designed for long-term deployments around the world. This is a battle cruiser. One word. We want to sort of, you go on and you can start to see the evolution of ships. Now, by the time you get to World War II, fast battleships are far more common. The joke, of course, about Vanguard is it's a fully armoured battle cruiser. It's a fast battleship. It's a fast battleship. So is the Lion, so is the King George V. They're all fast battleships. They're all variations on that theme. Some are slightly faster, some aren't. But they're all fast battleships. Why? Because the whole point about the battle cruiser, and you'll see this to an extent when we're talking about Seydlitz, is it's supposed to be able to use its speed to dictate the pace and the distance of battle. For that, it needs to be faster, at least 3 knots faster than its opponents. It also needs the room to manoeuvre to be able to do that. Once you get to World War II era, aircraft carriers are slightly more common, and you cannot dictate the speed so much to an aircraft carrier, because aircraft can always outpace you. So you need to be able to work with an aircraft carrier, you need to be able to work with fast manoeuvring forces, and you need enough armor and firepower to take some of the hits you're going to take. So the metric becomes far more sensible to put the technology into a fast battleship than to try and develop both a battleship and a battlecruiser. It's more useful. Plus, it's more useful on a strategic level, because you can more rapidly redeploy between sites. But anyway, that's enough background. Let's get into Seydlitz herself. So, shameless book plug. I do this in every single video. There's a reason I do this in every single video. One, I've only got one book to plug at the moment. There are more coming. And money, moving house, all those things allowing, there will be more. Those books will come out soon. They're written. They just need to be pictures and need to be finally edited together. And I need to check they're in a good format for release as ebooks to begin with. But I am looking at the various services where you can do print to order. And the idea being that I upload the books as I would like them to be, and people can order a physical copy. And I get some money back, but I think they also get a profit. I'm looking into all the various options, because I don't know how many people would actually buy the physical copy, and also doing what I'm doing, I'm sort of going down somewhere new. I'm trying to, in the style of Tribals, Battles and Darings in a way, I'm trying to put together a series of roughly 50,000 word, 45 to 50,000 word class reviews, discussions of classes and key things the ships did. So something with sort of academic level referencing, but actually able to be read by everyone. So it can be used by all levels. It sort of can serve someone who's new to the topic and someone who's a university student looking to find out more sources and look to where to go and which archives to go to. That's tricky to balance. It's really too tricky to balance when you're also house hunting. Says the person who hasn't actually managed to do any work on it this month at all. They're ready, but they're not. They need to have the pictures put in them. They need to have the things set up. And they will do. There are very kind people suggesting various ways of raising the money for that, and I will probably go that route. But until then, shameless book plug. Because the second edition of this is out, and I really want people to read it more, because I love this topic. I did so much work on it, and it was what really got me back into history after doing my PhD and doing my thesis, because I love my thesis, I love my topic, I love doing it, but afterwards I honestly never wanted to talk about an aircraft carrier ever again. I never wanted to write, I had done it so much, I had to argue so much to get it through and put it together, and I know I've got to turn the thesis into a book, I really do, but then I have to go back and sort out some of the pictures, and the pictures I was given originally licenses for were academic thesis licenses, and I know how much they're going to cost to go back and get them to have commercial licenses to be able to publish it as a book. And when I was originally doing it, I was under the impression that advances would give you the money to be able to do that. No, they do not. They do not in any way, shape or form give you enough money to do that. They just don't. But we'll see. It'll be an interesting topic. But no, it was the tribal class destroyers, it was the battle class, and it was the daring class, and it was Admiral Henderson, and here's wanting to discuss his story that got me back into, okay, this is something I want to write, this is something I want to talk about, this is something I want to share. After being exhausted a little bit after the PhD thesis. Just a tad. So Seydlitz is a unique ship. As said, she's number 4. And I've always had a bit of a special place in my heart for her. I'm not sure why. She has wing turrets, and I really, really despise wing turrets. It's a well-known thing. I hate them, and even if they're offset wing turrets, I still hate them even more. I hate the idea of firing cross-deck with wing turrets. I know the damage you're going to do to the deck. I know you're not going to practice it in peacetime. And even in wartime, when you do it, there is a limited scope for those guns and where they can hit a target. And then there's all the balancing and all the complicated engineering, and the fact it also affects the beam and therefore the speed of the ship. Really, really dislike wing turrets. Really do. But still, she just always spoke to me. Because nothing is more simple than her lines. It's elegance. It's German engineering actually being brought. And the thing about Seydlitz, with her history, is that in many ways she's one of the least mucked around. Because the various senior officers are fully immersed in fighting over the flingers when she is being designed and built. They're already fighting over the next generation. They're already arguing over the next generation of battleships. They are taking no notice of Seydlitz at all. So her design team has put together this design, and it's being built because they aren't ready with the other ones because they're arguing over all of them. And what they get is a fundamentally useful ship. It's amazing. A ship which doesn't have about a bajillion cooks trying to muck around with the recipe and add their own flavour and own signature to it, turns out to be a really good ship. Who'd have thought? Saying that, she does have some issues. And it becomes clear once we start looking at her stats what those particular issues are. For starters, she is a battlecruiser, and she can do 26.5 knots. Now, this is a small problem when you consider she's laid down in 1911, launched in 1912, and commissioned in 1913. Very quickly, the Royal Navy is talking about building a battleship which would have been faster than her. The Queen Elizabeth class, if they had been built, especially with small tube boilers, would have been 28-knot ships. As it was, they accepted the conventional boilers at the time, the large tube boilers, and they were mostly struggling to make 25 knots. But either way, that's not a 3-knot advantage over those battleships. That's not a commanding speed advantage. And realistically, the equivalent battlecruisers of the Royal Navy, HMS Queen Mary, can do 28 knots. Which means she has rather a knot and a half advantage speed over Seydlitz. Seydlitz has officially a knot and a half advantage speed over the Queen Elizabeth class, which are coming quite soon at this point. It's all getting rather close. Because if Seydlitz gets damaged in any way, shape or form, she's going to have battleships which can catch her. Because it doesn't take her losing much of a top speed, and that's not much damage, to make her within range of them. And yes, you can say the same thing about Queen Mary, but the thing is, with Queen Mary, she can command an advantage over the German dreadnoughts, even if she loses quite a lot of her speed. After all, they're mostly 21-knot ships. She can do 28. She has to lose 25% of her ability, her forward momentum. Her speed has to be reduced by 25%. For her to be in a range of which they're sort of going to catch. Okay, you can say 22-ish, they could probably catch her in the right sort of weather, but 21 knots is officially where it's going to go. So that's a problem. And the thing is, for the Germans, the reality of that problem is because of the armour, because of the protection they want, because they are trying to make these very much battle cruisers which can support the battle line. The things they are adding in to enable them to support the battle line is making them slower. Is meaning they're having to put necessarily less hull space towards engines and more hull space towards subdivision and armour. And this does make them more survivable in combat, please note. But this is usually where I start to talk about how the Germans might have been better if they'd pushed everything towards the sort of fast battleship line instead of trying to do both battle cruisers and battleships. Technologically, yes, it is an option. And you can say the way the Navy laws are structured, etc., that's their policy. But building a faster battle line would have probably assisted them more than building battle cruisers. And the Royal Navy needed to build battle cruisers. So the thing is, you would have driven up the Royal Navy's costs far more, because they'd have had to make their battle line, try and make their battle line faster to match the German battle line. But the Royal Navy would still have had to be building battle cruisers because of the huge global empire it has to defend against surface raiders, against those threats. So the thing is, going the fast battleship route would have really caused the Royal Navy a lot of trouble and a lot more expense. It would be the easiest way to drive up the cost of the Royal Navy Dreadnought program would be to raise the speed of the German Dreadnoughts and go for a fast battleship line themselves. But still, Seydlitz is a battle cruiser. She's a solid battle cruiser. And she's got 27 water tube boilers, supplying 4 Parsons turbines. Now, this is the other point that's always interested me in the German battlecruiser program and a lot of the German faster ship program. Britain could have caused them an inordinate amount of trouble if they'd refused to supply them with turbines, or if they delayed them in any way, shape or form. The clever thing would have been to agree to sell them and then it's taken forever to deliver them. Delay their programs, drive up their costs, snarl up their yards. It's very easy to do, and there's also many legitimate reasons for why turbines would have to be delayed. But they didn't. But it's also an interesting point to think about when we sort of talk about ships and we're talking about the technological development, and that's one of the reasons why I like to use Seydlitz here, of the dreadnoughts around the world in the pre-World War I era, in that a lot of the technology is shared. A lot of the technology is going across borders, across continents, across the oceans, and it's being shared between them. One of the classic examples is that John Brown and Company is, by World War I, is being run by an American who is taking after many other Americans who served in John Brown and Company. That's the big shipyard on the Clyde. Lots of Americans serving in it, and lots of Brits serving in American yards building American ships. It's one of the reasons why the whole idea that there's this massive naval race going on between Britain and America and it can be really dangerous and could spill over and cause troubles never really rings true when you consider the sheer amount of Americans who work in British yards and the sheer amount of British engineers who work in American yards. It means that, in the nicest way, they don't need intelligence apparatus to know what each other's building. They just wander along to the nearest engineering conference and usually find them discussing it. Usually British engineers discussing what they're building in American yards with American engineers who are discussing what they're building in British yards with those British engineers. And vice versa. It's just fun. She has good quality armour, but again, if we're talking about Seydlitz, it's the coverage of the armour that matters. It's the coverage, and where she has armour, where she doesn't have armour. And that matters. Because whilst it is 11.8 inches thick in its strongest area, tapers down to 3.9 inches thick in the bow and stern, the belt doesn't go as deep as it does on a battleship. It doesn't protect as much of the hull. It doesn't form as much of a citadel as it does on an equivalent battleship. She has a good mix of guns. Okay, yes, she has the 11-inch guns, and I'm going to be talking about 11-inch guns a lot when I get to the Scharnhorst class, because I'll be talking about the interwar development of them. But honestly, this is the L50 gun, and it's a very good gun. The Germans are very much fans of the built-up methodology of gun construction. They're going to still be very much fans of it by World War II. Others have developed other systems of gun design, as I discussed in a video about gun construction. But the Germans are very good at building very good quality built-up guns, and the 11-inch is a good example of this. The L50 has a lot of penetration capabilities. 5 twin turrets. It's good firepower. 12 150mm, a 50mm gun. 5.9 inch. They are, of course, there to keep off smaller cruisers and torpedo boats and destroyers. The 88mm guns, well, they are theoretically anti-aircraft guns, but they're also used for dealing with smaller surface threats. And you have 4 torpedo tubes. Why? Well, everyone fits them with torpedo tubes. She carries 11 torpedoes for those 4 tubes. But, let's be honest, originally she has the G6, which has a range of 5 kilometers or 16,000 feet at roughly 35 knots. Well, no, at 27 knots. At 35 knots it goes down to roughly 2 kilometers. Sorry, I was reading my notes and just in shock there. And then there's the G7, which replaces that in 1913, which increases the range to a whopping 17 kilometers at 27 knots, and 7.5 kilometers, roughly, at 37 knots. Which is nice to have, but let's just consider the fact that the 11-inch guns at an angle of 13.5 degrees could hit targets at 18 kilometers away, and by 1916 were able to hit targets at 19 kilometers away. And the thing is, the shells would get there a lot quicker than the torpedoes would, and they wouldn't leave a trail, and they wouldn't require the ship pretty much physically orientating itself. Basically, the moral of the story is, if you're using your battlecruiser or battleship as a torpedo attack vessel, something's gone terribly wrong, even in World War I. Okay, if you're doing it because the enemy's wandered into range and they're being stupid enough to keep maneuvering in a straight line. Both of which are things they shouldn't be doing, because their guns are longer range. And at any point, their guns outrange their torpedoes. They'd have to go at 27 knots to reach out to 17 kilometers. And that's the G7 variant. That's not really much of a help. And of course the vessel had a range of 4,200 nautical miles at 14 knots. Again though, there is a reason for this. These vessels, for all their capabilities, are not really designed for the global oceanic raiding missions. They're not economic warfare. They're the fast arm of the battle fleet. It's another reason why I strongly make the case the Germans should have been investing in fast battleships rather than building both dreadnoughts and battle cruisers. They should have gone down that route. And before people start saying, well, the fast battleship wasn't a concept, the fast battleship was a concept. And honestly, the interesting one for that is the Dante Alighieri, which at one point the Italians, when they were looking at her, were talking about potentially her having bigger guns and having a 24, 25 knot speed when she was first being built, which if she had and had come in at the same time as Dreadnought, if the Italians had ordered her when they could have done, and the Italians could have built her fairly quickly and fairly provisionally. They had the yards, they had the infrastructure. There is the very real potential that Dreadnought becomes the gloire of her period, and the Dante Alighieri becomes the warrior of her period, and it completely turns the tail on the British. But it didn't happen, and that's a discussion for another video, another day. Man, it's a fun topic to think about. So, let's talk some more about the design, shall we? So as you can see from this, it's a very interesting design. It's a laid out design. One of the things that always intrigues me is that due to the German construction preference, their necessary preference, in order to try and get as many dreadnoughts and battlecruisers as they could, they basically sacrificed their cruiser program, and to a certain extent they sacrificed their destroyer program. Their vessels are closer to torpedo boats than torpedo boat destroyers because they need to build as many as they can whilst not taking up that much infrastructure and industry, so they can concentrate and pour the money in the resources into their capital ship program, into their dreadnoughts. And this has an impact on their dreadnoughts and their battlecruisers, in that whereas for the Royal Navy, whilst the ships are designed with these smaller guns, in the case of the Seydlitz, she has 88mm originally fitted for anti-surface defense as well as the 5.9-inch guns, and she then has 88mm fitted later for anti-aircraft fire. You know, their firing arcs are critically important. The positioning of those guns is critically important to her survival. In the Royal Navy, they have the advantage in that whilst they are going to still put some care and attention in it, they've got a plethora of town-class cruisers, which the mission profile of which in wartime is to wipe out enemy destroyer forces. That's literally what the Royal Navy is able to do. That's the infrastructure advantage of the Royal Navy. They are building a surfeit of capital ships. They are building more, as I've already discussed. You know, at Jutland, they literally have more dreadnought battleships at the battle than the Germans have capital ships, whether those are pre-dreadnought, or as I like to call them, sovereign-style battleships, whether they are battle cruisers or dreadnought battleships, and they're all combined, they're still less, cumulatively, than the number of dreadnought battleships the Royal Navy has at Jutland. And conversely, the Royal Navy has not sacrificed cruiser construction in any way, shape or form. They've produced many, many times the number of cruisers as pretty much anyone else. In fact, one of the really interesting things is that the Royal Navy sort of keeps talking about whether it's a 1-power standard, 2-power standard, what kind of standard it's going for in its capital ships. If you look at its cruiser construction, that is completely unchecked. It's basically just churning them out. We're talking about a navy which literally at times the Admiralty forgets how many cruisers they have in the world and where they all are. Admittedly, they've got a lot going on in World War One, but that is the scenario of the Royal Navy that I think Drac likes to quote on his channel. You know, they're the navy which just looks down the back of a sofa and goes, "Oh, that's where a town class cruiser was." Well, the example I tend to give is that there was actually a couple of them operating off the east coast of Africa at one point, and the Royal Navy got a message from the ships saying they would complete their patrols and were heading in, and the Royal Navy was going, and the Admiralty were going, these ships were there? Were they supposed to be there? Who assigned them there? Life happens. But for the Germans, the lack of the ability to invest in cruisers, especially light cruisers, as well as everything else they're investing, lack of being able to build the larger torpedo boat destroyers, meant that the fitting of the secondaries to engage destroyers, to engage light cruisers, to engage torpedo boats was even more important, because especially for scouting vessels, they are likely to run into light forces. They are going to be at the topping edge of the spear, right at the point of it. And therefore, they're most likely to find themselves running into the light forces which will appear. So they need to be able to defend themselves, because nothing else is going to be there to help them. Her career doesn't start with World War One. It actually starts earlier than that. And one of the things is that she has an interesting beginning. She's actually christened by General de Cavalerie, Karl Wilhelm Heinrich von Kleist. You know, that's exactly who I would think of when I was getting someone to christen my battlecruiser, my brand new ultimate ship. Would be to get a general of the cavalry to come and christen her. It's just what you do on the 30th of March 1912 when she's launched. And then when she's commissioned in May 1913, of course, this is to another part of the Kaiserlich Marines' desire to get ships into service as quickly as possible, to grow their numbers as quickly as possible for bragging rights. She, of course, enters service before she's gone through her final trials, but they do give her some advantage by commissioning her. They take the crew from the armoured cruiser de York, of course, which we know a little bit about because of the Erzach York video already done in this series, or rather an earlier series of the key ships, which the Yorks transferred to the reserve fleet, and the crew formed the kernel of the crew on the Seydlitz. And this gives her an advantage, and then she goes into trials, and she's done further testing, and then they fix her after those trials, reveal some issues. Not many issues, but some that require fixing. And so she joins the High Seas Fleet for the 1913 manoeuvres off Heligoland. And during these manoeuvres, she's watched quite carefully by a Contra-Admiral, or Rear Admiral, Franz von Hipper. When he gains command of 1st Scouting Group and raises his flag on 23rd of June 1914, he's picked Seydlitz out as his flagship, having watched the performance. And she would serve as flagship until October 1917, so most of World War I, she would be Hipper's flagship. And he doesn't pick her because she's pretty, although that would be a good reason to pick her. He picks her because she is an obviously solid, capable vessel. A reliable vessel. Something which an admiral needs. Because honestly, whilst admirals do have a tendency to go for the flashiest and newest vessel, what they really need, is a solid vessel. And she was a very solid vessel for a battlecruiser. Her wartime career as the flagship of Hipper, of the 1st Scouting Group, was just as interesting and just exciting. She, of course, took part in the Battle of Heligoland Light in August 1914, the first bombardment of Yarmouth in November 1914, the bombardments of Scarborough, Hartlepool and Whitby in December 1914. Then in 1915 took part in the Battle of Dogger Bank, which, as you know, she had some interesting experiences in, which changed, specifically, the German methodology of magazine security. Specifically, a 13.5-inch shell from HMS Lion, we think, hit Seydlitz and managed to hold the deck and penetrate the rear barbette. The shell failed to enter the barbette, but the explosion flashed into the working chamber. This detonated propellant charges in the side, in the reloading chamber. The flames rose up into the turret and down into the ammunition chamber, and managed to go through a connecting door which was usually kept shut, but what was open because men from the ammunition chamber tried to escape into the fore turret. The flames therefore made their way through to the other ammunition chamber and up the second turret. And this caused both gun crews to perish together. The explosion killed 159 men, destroyed both of the rear turrets. it was only prevented from spreading to the shell magazines by the executive officer who ordered both magazines to be flooded. Otherwise, she could well have been blown sky high then. Now, this leads to all sorts of developments in German ammunition control and ammunition storage and magazine security. But she's not out of service for long, and in August 1915, she takes part in the Battle of the Gulf of Riga, along with Moltke and von der Tann, who basically transfer there to take part in various operations. In April 1916, she's back in the North Sea for the second bombardment of Yarmouth and also to nab Lowestoft, so she really does run that one up. And then, of course, is the Battle of Jutland, where once again she proves to be under a lucky star because that ship is, well, she's not sunk, but I wouldn't classify her as afloat. I'm not sure about you. You might differ on this opinion. You might look at those pictures and go, well, it's perfectly fine to have negative freeboard. But myself, I don't. I'd say that's a very well built and very lucky ship, because any more hits, any more damage, and she's gone. But she's not sunk, she's just not afloat. She's sort of, I don't know, me front crawling through the water. I mean, I'm usually fairly buoyant, but I'm definitely not mostly above the water. Maybe she's iceberging it? I think we'll go with iceberging it. There's a lot more below the water than there is above the water. But either way, that's her career. And then after Jutland, well, she takes part in all the operations that come, but she never gets action again, and frankly that's possibly a good thing, because the amount of repairs they've had to do on her, that ship is... It's either those repairs are going to prove absolutely solid and completely fine, or they're going to fall apart in a moment with any slight damage. So, in summary, tough ship. Honestly, this is where you get into the interesting discussions, and what I think causes quite a lot of people to start to get confused about other ships as to where they are on that spectrum, where they are on the Battlecruiser, Battlecruiser, fast battleship spectrum. Because when you see the German ships, they are called Battlecruiser, and actually to begin with they're called Battlecruisers, i.e. two words. But they are never really. They're always somewhere on the spectrum between the Battlecruiser and the fast battleship. They're always heading there. And if you look at where the German builds and German constructions are going, that is where they're going, because that fits the German needs more. The British have this massive empire they have to protect the trade of, protect the commerce, which means they need some ship which is with the technology available at the time, and that's what creates the Battlecruiser, because you can't get a fully armoured ship go fast enough. This is what leads to the whole Vanguard being called a fully armoured battlecruiser. It's literally almost a British joke. Because, well, yeah, we've made it a fully armoured battlecruiser. It's a fast battleship. If you can fully armour, i.e. have the coverage of a battlecruiser equivalent to a battleship, and still maintain the speed and the deployability of a battlecruiser, you've built a fast battleship. You've built the dream fast battleship. The thing that sits right dead centre in the middle of that spectrum, probably. Possibly slightly over, actually. And because it's got the full armour. But the thing is, for most of the period we're talking about, your technological abilities allow you to do one or the other. It allows you to fully armour a ship, or to have the speed and operational flexibility of a battlecruiser. You can have the subdivision and have the protection and survivability of a battleship, or you can have the deployability and the global presence and the strategic mobility of a battlecruiser. You cannot have both in the technology. Now, the Germans are trying to get both. And the thing is, if you're prepared to accept some limitations, you probably can achieve something within the German requirements and the German needs that approximates the halfway point, approximates the fast battleship. It might not be as fast as we traditionally consider a fast battleship. We traditionally consider them to be vessels which are capable of 28 knots or more. But there again, in a period where all the battleships do 21 knots, perhaps 25, 26 knots is a fast battleship in the 1900s, 1910s. That's the question. That's the point to think it through. And honestly, the Seydlitz, she isn't a fully armoured ship. She is not a fast battleship. She is definitely a battlecruiser. But her subdivision, her armouring, etc., mean that she's far further through that spectrum than her British counterparts, because of the role she's built for, because she has built that role of being a second line ship. In a way, you can say that if we put them in age of sail terms, British battleships are built to be first or second rates, the same with the Germans. But the British build their battle cruisers as fourth rates. The Germans try to build those as third rates. And there's a difference there. There is a difference. Oh, before I go, what's the question? What is the question for Seydlitz? Well, it's very simple. I've put the question before as to whether or not you think the Germans should have gone with fast battleships or tried to develop a fast battleship line. I'm going to put it this side. Instead of starting with their battleship line, start with their battlecruiser line. If with their battlecruisers they'd instead gone a fast battleship route, far more than a battlecruiser route, do you think it would help them? Accepting slightly slower speed, as they did do with their later battlecruisers. Their later battlecruisers are a classic example of this. The Flingers are 26.5 knot ships again. The Mackensons peak at 28 knots. That's their supposed design speed. But the Erzat Yorks drop down to 27.3 knots. Why? So they can carry the bigger guns and have more armour. That is the point. The Germans are pretty much building their battlecruisers arguably towards a fast battleship anyway. So it would have been better to go that route, accept the slower speed, accept their ships maybe peak at 27 or so knots under this technology paradigm, and are able to still carry the armor, etc., necessary to have the necessary and the firepower necessary to fit in that second line role while being fast enough to do some of the scouting role. That's a question to think about. Instead of building a whole fleet of fast battleships, build fast battleships instead of battlecruisers. They won't be as fast as British battlecruisers, but they will have a consequence for the British, for the French, for all the other powers. Because if the Germans build them, you know the others are going to have to match in against them. And if the Germans start with the Von der Tann, or even the Moltkers, possibly the Moltkers more than Von der Tann, the British are going to have to respond quite early on. Again, anything which ups the cost and the problems for the British in terms of procurement of ships, that's going to help the Germans, not hinder them. So what have we got coming up? Well, this is now coming out on the 20th of November. And so it's building the fleets of Tsushima tomorrow. That's going to be fun. And we are 1 week away from the last of the Year of Technology videos, theoretically. The last one for of the main trunk series. Why no more battleships? Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Take care.